and increase the size of payments. I think we all know that that would make a huge difference to bereaved families. And whether through bereavement, illness or other circumstances, so many families across our country are providing care for children whose parents cannot look after them. This is known as kinship care. And this motion recognises the amazing role of kinship carers, as does the amendment which I support. This dedication goes unsung and under-supported all too often. The vital role played by family members looking after children when parents are unable to is an act of love and service that allows so many children across our country to have the happy and fulfilling childhoods that they deserve. But we also know that kinship carers are struggling. They feel invisible and unsupported amidst a cost of living crisis that has left more than 1 in 10 of those carers doing such important and loving work, worried that they will have to give up their caring duties. And that's why this motion includes the crucial commitment to introduce a statutory definition of kinship care and looks to provide a weekly allowance for all kinship carers. Because we know that the research shows that many children in kinship care will have experienced trauma. And that's why this motion would also extend the Pupil Premium Plus to give them the same support in their education that is afforded to other looked after children. A fulfilling and supportive educational environment is one of the most important steps we can take to improve outcomes for children in care. This motion would commit to a guarantee that any child taken into care would be given a school place within 3 weeks if they are required to move schools. And that will provide the crucial stability for looked after children at what is some of the most disruptive and traumatic times of their lives. For far too long, children who have been bereaved and children in care or kinship care have been an afterthought for our government. And that's why the Liberal Democrats are committed to taking the long overdue step of appointing a Cabinet Minister for Children and Young People, because that minister would have specific responsibilities to close the existing gaps in support for children who have lost a parent or indeed both their parents. Bereaved children would finally have a champion around the Cabinet table who could begin the work of making sure that the UK is a place where they are properly supported to live the full and happy childhoods that they deserve. So, conference, in closing, I urge you to support this motion, to commit to reversing the Tories' cruel cut to bereavement payments, to commit to supporting kinship carers and committing to give these children the support that they need to flourish. A new Parliament, with the largest number of Liberal Democrat MPs we've ever seen, it's 72 if you haven't heard so, is a real opportunity to fight for our liberal values and to fix the mess left by the previous Conservative government. It's a chance to show the public that we are the party of compassion and caring, a party that stands up for the most vulnerable people in our country, and that we will always stand by the rights of children to live those happy and fulfilling lives. Conference, please support this motion and the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Could I ask Olivia Dunn to stand by? And I now call Munira Wilson, who is moving Amendment 1.
Thank you, Conference. It's a pleasure to be moving Amendment 1 today. Can I start by thanking both Wendy and Christine for putting forward this important motion for debate today. As the motion states, there are over 140,000 children living in kinship care, many of whom have experienced bereavement, trauma and other unimaginable hardship. Lines 53 to 55 of the motion are a good starting point in terms of support we should be providing to kinship carers. But Amendment 1 goes somewhat further to align with the motion we passed at Spring Conference last year and ensure that children living in kinship and their carers are supported. For too long, the love of kinship carers and the benefits they provide to the children they look after, and indeed society as a whole, have been overlooked. Our party has a strong record of standing up for kinship carers. I was proud to introduce the Kinship Care Bill in the last Parliament with cross-party support. And Ed has spoken movingly about his own experiences of growing up in the care of his grandmother. Every kinship carer I speak to says they didn't hesitate to take a child into their care when the need arose or when they were asked to. They just did it, because that's what you do for family. It's instinctive. But the additional costs of taking on a child unexpectedly can put a huge financial pressure on carers. And recently I signed an open letter calling on the new government for better kinship support. And it was written by a young woman called Poppy, who grew up in kinship care herself. And she said, "At a young age, I felt like a burden, and I couldn't help but feel responsible for inflicting this experience and strain on my grandmother. Conference, no child should feel like that growing up. For many kinship carers, as we've heard from Wendy, the situation has got worse in the midst of a cost of living crisis, with 1 in 10 kinship carers saying that they might be forced to give up caring for a child if their financial situation didn't improve within a year. And that's why it's so important there's proper financial support for kinship carers. The amendment proposes providing a kinship carer with a weekly allowance on a par with foster carers. And because as things stand, there's a postcode lottery of allowances across the country. By putting in place a statutory definition of kinship care, as line 53 calls for, and ensuring that everyone who falls within that definition gets an allowance equivalent to foster carers, we can ensure that family members are not put off taking on a child if they lose a parent due to death or another reason. It's not just the morally right thing to do, it makes financial sense. It costs about half of what it costs to put a child into local authority care, to put a child into kinship care with allowances on a par with foster carers. And that financial pressure gets exacerbated because of lack of employment support. Some 45% of kinship carers have had to reduce their working hours, and a further 40% have had to leave work entirely. It can't be right that kinship carers are punished in that way for doing the right thing. And that's why Amendment 1 also calls for a right to paid employment leave similar to what is available to adoptive parents, in order that kinship carers can provide the care and support that children so desperately need at a very painful time in their lives. As Wendy's already said, Liberal Democrats are the party of care. Kinship carers are our unsung heroes whose stories are often not heard and their struggles are not seen. Let's recommit ourselves to giving them the support they deserve, both proper financial allowances and a right to paid employment leave. I urge you all to vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Munira. Could I ask Catherine Macy to stand by? And I now call Olivia Dunn, who is a first-time speaker.
Good afternoon, conference. Thank you all for being here today to discuss such an important motion. And it's my first time not only speaking, but at conference at all. And it seems that I have picked the perfect time to attend. So I'm here today to speak to you as someone who has a very personal interest in this motion. From the ages of 6 to 18, I was raised in kinship care, first by one aunt and then by another under a special guardianship order. And for the last 5 years, I've spent that living with my grandparents. And for this, I consider myself extremely lucky. And I could speak for hours and hours about kinship care and how incredible kinship carers are, but time is brief, so I'll try and keep it relevant. So, firstly, I cannot stress enough how crucial financial support is and how strongly I support the calls to expand the trials that have been going on at some councils, as well as the amendment that's been put forward today. Kinship carers take on children out of love, and they are often completely unprepared for the financial aspect of raising a child. And as I'm sure many of you here are aware, the costs are substantial. Removing a child from parental care does not necessarily mean placing them into a dual-income, low-expense household. Many carers are grandparents and may be retired. Others, like my wonderful Auntie Kaz, are single parents on low income. Every bit of funding that we can give these amazing carers will go a very long way to improving a child's life chances. My next point is on the Pupil Premium Plus. When at school, I received free school meals and was on the Pupil Premium myself. And the impact that these factors had on my well-being are undeniable. At a time when home was chaotic, the safety and predictability of school provided a safe haven, a place where I had adults that I could rely on and a warm meal every weekday. And it's no secret that care-experienced children generally have lower academic outcomes and progression to HE. Now, thankfully, that wasn't the case for myself, and I'm now a first-generation scholar. And I don't say that for praise, but because I want to show that it can be done when you give disadvantaged children what they need to thrive. Now, seeing our MPs lead the discussion has made me incredibly proud to be a member, and hearing our fantastic new MP Bobby Dean share his experience made me so very happy to see that as well, and I can't wait to see what he does in the kinship APPG. Now, we're already doing fantastic work in this area, and there's so much more I know we can do. So please support this motion conference and the amazing amendment given as well, to give kinship carers and their children the support they so richly deserve and have been denied for so long. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. Could I ask Caroline Voden to stand by, and could I call Catherine Macy?
Before university, I taught musical theatre to 5-year-olds, and when I informed them I was going to university, one of them said, "What's that?" And another one went, "It's where you find your husband." I didn't meet a husband at university or a wife, but I did meet someone I consider my soulmate. And at the age of 19, and he was 24, he was diagnosed with bone cancer. And 6 months later, he was dead. He never finished his PhD. He barely got out of bed in those 6 months due to a break in that leg. And I watched him wither away. An incredibly intelligent man. He was a Lib Dem, for one, but someone that this world is worse off without. I miss him every day. But I know stuff like this is what's important, because it took me a year to get any bereavement help. And at that point they said, "You'll probably be all right." I was 19 and I buried my boyfriend after watching him fade away. It's a pretty drastic example, but it's not unique. And I also had to watch my grandfather and uncle do the same. The only thing I'm grateful for is the fact all of them died reasonably quickly. I didn't have to watch them suffer. But I did have to go through being a teenager, trying to work out what to do. In fact, I went to a few bereavement groups where they made comments of, "Oh, mine's different because I lost my husband, you'll have just lost a friend." Because obviously at the age of 19, no one expects you to lose your partner. I've never actually had a relationship since. Maybe the right person will come along, but just to really highlight the fact that it's only taken me until around this year to genuinely consider dating again. Bereavement is important, and we do not give our young people the ability to know how to cope. We all experience it, as carers especially, when we spend day in, day out looking after that person. We lose our purpose when they fade. Please vote for this motion, and thank you to everyone involved in bringing it forward.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Could I ask Sean MacDonald to stand by, and I now call Caroline Voden, MP.
Thank you, and I'd just like to acknowledge Catherine and Olivia for two very powerful speeches. So I'd like to talk to you about bereavement benefits, not from a policy point of view, but from a real-world lived experience point of view. In 2003, I was 34 when my husband died of esophageal cancer, aged just 42. Our little girls were 1 and 3 when he died. It was a brutal experience, but in one very small way, I was lucky. I received bereaved parents' allowance of just over £600 a month, which was paid until my children left school. And the amount was based on the national insurance contributions that Nick had dutifully paid in every month in over 20 years of work. He was never going to receive a state pension, so it seemed fairly just that the state helped us out at an incredibly difficult time with this benefit. As a bereaved single parent of 2 young children, I had a choice to make. Either I went back to work full-time and then spent most of my salary paying for others to look after my children after school and in the school holidays, or I could continue to work part-time, keeping one hand in the employment market while being able to spend valuable time with my children who had already lost one parent. Bereaved Parents Allowance gave me that choice. It allowed me to give 2 bereaved children the stability and care they needed at a time when their world had fallen apart. Too young to understand the meaning of death, but they knew they needed their mum. For many bereaved parents, this benefit is literally a lifeline. And because my children were so young, I received it for almost the maximum time it was payable. The average time was around 5 to 6 years. But in April 2017, The previous Conservative government decided to cut it to just 18 months and replaced it with a new benefit, which has not been updated since, despite the rise in the cost of living over the past 7 years. According to the Widowed and Young organisation, which supports 5,000 young widowed men and women, which I used to chair, the change left 91% of bereaved families supported for a shorter time and 75% worse off. Most of you in this hall will have experienced your own losses, and we all know that grief doesn't end after 18 months. For families with children, the effects of such a loss can go on for years and come and go over the years that follow. Early bereavement can have a devastating financial impact, especially if the person who died was the main breadwinner. The Liberal Democrats have done so much to raise the voice of carers and highlight the impact it can have on a family to care for loved ones at home. We must now do the same to support thousands of bereaved families at the most difficult time in their lives and convince the new Labour government that this is a cost worth paying. Supporting bereaved parents gives them the financial stability they need to hold families together. It removes the fear and stress that comes with struggling to pay the bills, and that support ultimately leads to happier, healthier children, which we all want. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Could I ask Sam Webber to stand by? And I now call Sean MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. Second time attending, but I'm a 50-something Virgin Conference speaker, and you're an experienced partner, so hopefully you'll be gentle with me. I'm supporting the full motion, however passionate about lines 37 to 45, given my personal journey. Conference, losing a parent is psychologically tough. I believe life-changing. It's similar to getting a flat tire on your mountain bike, something that happens to me a lot. You can keep going with your journey, but it's a lot harder with every turn of the pedals. Grinding the wheel rims on the track and navigating life ends up in some messy crashes. I lost my father to a heart attack when I was 12 years old, just after Christmas in my first year at secondary school. I still get flashbacks today, 40 years on, a couple of times a year, of the funeral service where my grief dam burst as my dad's coffin was escorted out. Shortly after, I also lost one of my gang of 3 close mates to leukemia and my last grandparent, the only one I ever knew a bit. So life seemed quite depressing, potentially traumatic, especially as a civil war broke out between my grieving mother and a much older sibling, periodically fueled by alcohol, medical issues and hormones, as natural balance had been lost in the family. It's not fun playing the adult when you are still a child, among so much anger and mistrust. I was, however, exceptionally lucky to have the support of godparents, a great uncle, family friends, school teachers, rugby and hockey club coaches, to keep me busy and sane through my teens, to navigate through this conflict, however, still personally broken until I later met my wife at university. Conference, others we all know are not so lucky. Within your circle, within mine, and in the wider community, be it financially or with functioning support networks. So like most interventions by the state, it's vital that practical and financial support is given early after a bereavement to keep young people on positive pathways at this time of massive turbulence, with help tailored to their needs, and with those that need the most getting extra help, so there is equity for all, avoiding a lottery of circumstances to dictate their future. It goes without saying that the uncaring and short-term Tories just didn't get this, with their steps backwards in this area and many others. We do as Liberal Democrats, and Conference, that's why this motion should get our support, so our young people, after a bereavement, like my flat tire analogy, can get moving again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Could I ask Bobby Dean to stand by? And I now call Sam Webber.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, Conference. I'm also a first-time speaker from the podium, only ever managed interventions from the floor previously, but I do think this is that rare thing, a motion where I genuinely did want to say something. Thank you for calling me. Losing a parent is one of the toughest moments it is possible for a child to experience, as it says at the beginning of the motion. The 11th of August 2002 was the day I lost my mum, 22 years ago now. I was 18, so perhaps more able to manage it than my 14-year-old sister and my 10-year-old brother. And interestingly, my life, as others have said, took a big turn on that day. I didn't go to university that autumn. I took a gap year to support my family, and the kinship care point has been well made. I phoned up an MP who I'd spent 2 days the previous year interning with, Simon Hughes, and I came to this conference 22 years ago, about a month after losing my mum, and my life changed. I spent my gap year with Simon and supporting my family, driving my brother to school and all of that. This is such a powerful motion, so important to those families. Ed has always spoken so powerfully about his own experience. He did it during the general election, and his mum's widow's pension as well. We've come full circle. So many of our new intake have spoken in their maiden speeches, and I would commend colleagues to go off and find the social media feed tracking these. Caroline, who's already spoken about her own experiences, and Chris Coghlan, in his maiden speech, talked about his mum, funnily enough, spoke incredibly powerfully, and Bobby, you're about to hear from, talked about his family situation. Our former colleague Simon Wright in Norwich South is the CEO of a charity in Norfolk, Nelson's Journey, supporting children and young people who have experienced the death of a significant person. So there's a lot of party involvement in this sector. The numbers may be modest, as the motion says, 26,900 parents dying per year, 46,300 dependent children per year. So absolutely, but hugely significant, and so good that we, following on from the general election, are speaking up for those people. Grandmothers, as the motion mentions, incredibly important, and was in my family too. Let's get behind this motion. Let's reverse the bereavement support cuts. Let's pass Christine's bereavement support children and young people bill. Let's have a cabinet minister for children and young people. As our chief whip said, it is a very important motion. Let's pass it today, and let's also pass the amendment. Thank you very much, conference.
Thank you, Sam. Could I ask Christine Jardine to stand by? And I now call Bobby Dean, MP.
Thank you. I want to share with you a story. It's about a young boy who loved football, playing for hours after school, and loved staying over his grandparents' house at the weekend. But what this boy didn't enjoy much was being at home. Mornings were pretty chaotic. There were daily arguments. And as he approached his teens, things started to boil over and get tough. Sometimes he would run away, usually to return later that evening, until one day, after one particularly bad night, he left the front door, called his nan, and asked if he could stay over. His nan picked him up, and he never went back. Now, this family never went through any legal process or sought any help for the new arrangement. There was no reason to. This was a family matter, and who had to know? But the grandparents didn't find it easy. They lived in a small council house and survived off the state pension, and then a hungry teenager to feed was a challenge. And the boy didn't find it easy either. He wasn't bereaved, but he'd still lost touch with his parents, barely speaking to them in the decade to come. And so it's no wonder that by his 20s he was struggling with his own mental health. But as sad as the story this may seem, it's actually a happy one. This boy didn't move into the care system when his family broke down, and as good as the work that people do in the care system, the odds are not great for a teenager when they move into it at that late stage. No, this boy had the love, the guidance, the support of his grandparents, who had the authority, respect, and trust to guide him in the right direction. And it helped him to become the first in his family to go to university. It also meant that when he sought to reconcile with his parents after going through counselling. There were no special hoops to jump through. Step by step, with the support of his family, he could rebuild that relationship on new terms. And now he's been on holiday with his parents, they were there for his wedding day, and most recently, they were in the public gallery when he made his maiden speech as the new MP for Carshalton and Wallington. Conference, kinship care is personal for me because I grew up in it. I didn't know it was called that at the time, but since learning about other grandparents, uncles, aunties, and older siblings who are all stepping up, I feel a responsibility to speak up for this special kind of care. And I've just got to say, I'm also grateful for all the other speakers who have shared their stories too today, including Olivia just a moment ago. This amendment calls for kinship care to be given the recognition and support that it deserves, getting it defined into law and bringing their rights into line with foster carers. I know that my grandparents would have appreciated that support, and I hope that grandparents of the future can get it if we support this today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bobby. And I now call Christine Jardine to summate on the motion.
Conference, just realised I was the first person to speak this morning. And here we are at the end. I always expected this debate to be difficult because it's so personal. And for so many of us, it brings up memories and parts of our lives that we don't regret, but we don't really like to think about too much. So I'd especially like to thank Olivia, Catherine, Caroline, Sean, Sam, and Bobby for sharing their stories. Because if we want to achieve what Wendy talked about earlier, what Munira has talked about, what I've worked for, what Ed has worked for, then we can tell people that we think it's a good idea, but they will only listen if they hear why it's a good idea. And they hear the difference that kinship care has made to individuals and how it has helped them. And that's why it's so important that you shared those stories with us today, because it gives us the reason. It reminds us why we're doing it. It reminds us why we need bereavement support reinstated. It reminds us why we need recognition for kinship care. I was also bereaved as a child. Although I was 20, I thought I was an adult. My sisters were 13 and 8. And I became, overnight, the second parent in the house. I became the second adult. And I didn't think about it at the time. And it only was brought home to me when my daughter was 8. And I thought, wow, it's the age I was when Dad died. How did Mum deal with this? When she was 13, I thought, wow, that's the age Irene was. How did my mum deal with this? And then the biggest irony of all is that when Vary was the same age, almost to the day that I had been when my dad died, her dad died. And I realised that I hadn't been such an adult after all. I'd still been a child. I had needed support. And I didn't have any, neither did my sisters. Because we're very bad in this country at the moment of knowing how to put people in touch with the support that they need, and how to put the people offering the support in touch with the people who need it. There are charities out there, there are organisations who offer not financial support, but emotional support, counselling for children who need it. Winston's Wish. Someone mentioned the local one, Nelson's Way. But they don't know how to get in touch with the children who need them. And the children who need them don't necessarily know that they're there. So our approach, I believe, has to be a two-pronged one. We have to get the bereavement support back in place. We have to get the recognition, the deserved recognition for kinship carers, but we also have to make sure that every child out there who loses not just a parent or a grandparent or a friend or a friend's parent knows where the help is for them. Because as someone mentioned, I think it was Caroline, you need healthy children. Healthy, happy children become healthy, happy adults with stable lives, stable relationships, commit to society. So for all those reasons, yes, we need, please, to support this amendment, but also Munira's amendment, because no child should feel a burden. And the fact that Poppy did breaks my heart, and I'm sure it does for all of you. So conference, please, support the amendment, support the motion, and do what we do best. Think about care and think about people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. And I'd also like to thank all of the speakers for sharing their experiences today, and apologies for those that we weren't able to call. So we now move to the votes. We'll vote first on the amendment. So if I could see all those in favour of the amendment, please raise your cards. Thank you. And anyone against? Thank you. Not seeing any cards there, and that is echoed by the online vote. So could I now see all cards in favour of the motion as amended? Thank you very much. And all those against? Thank you very much. So thank you to my aide, Lucas North, and the hall aide as well. And that concludes business for today. Do enjoy the fringes this evening.